To Possess Vengeance by Aidan Mayberger. Hot blood dripped from the bottom of the barrel and steam from the top. Tristan pulled the gun's spike, dripping with blood, back, and pulled the trigger again. Click. Mechanically, he cocked the spike and pulled the trigger. Again and again. Click. Click, click. The flames of passion left him hollow and burned out as he stared at the corpse of Dolton. A hand fumbled in his ammo pouch. Nothing. Click. The man was dead. Shouldn't he be happy now, or at least satisfied? Click. But Elaine was still dead. Tristan's feet felt heavy in his thick leather boots. He fumbled in the dead man's ammo pouch. 4 fresh, true-shot bullets. Not even enough to refill his 6-shooter. Tristan slumped to the ground. Will seeped from his limbs and away into the earth. Exhaustion filled the void in his heart, and he fell into a deep sleep. Red hands rubbed dreary eyes. Soft skin felt cold and damp. Tristan woke with blood on his hands, in the bed of a dead woman. Naked but for her blood, he jolted out of bed, toned shoulders slamming into the wall. Where were his clothes? Revulsion filled his gut, and he vomited next to the bed. The door to the small wooden room shook with a heavy hand's knock. "You all right, man?" came a heavy voice from outside. Tristan looked with horror at the room. "Yes," he growled. As footsteps receded, he threw on his pants, belt, and shirt. A long leather coat with a dun Stetson topped the outfit, and he pushed out the door, jamming it closed. He twisted it slightly in the frame, making it hard to reopen. He was in a narrow wooden hall, dust covering the sun-bleached red carpet. Lanterns dotted the walls. At the far end, a set of rickety stairs led him to a room full of empty tables and a bar. A man, heavy in shoulders and arms, rested near the door. In the man's arms, a mouser. The massive corpse arm was likely loaded with shrapnel. "You're up early, Dolton." The big man yawned. "Just went to bed by my measure." "Dolton? Dolton!" Tristan's hand twitched towards his pistol, but the spike was dry, and with it the magic that fueled the corpse arm. Thumbing the spike now would likely result in the mouser tearing him limb from limb. "You all right, Dolton? You did get kinda jumpy earlier. Figured you and Cher were done." A crooked smile stretched across Tristan's face. "I'm fine. Just need some fresh air." The big man snorted. "Told you you'd want some after taking Cher to your room." Tristan couldn't force the laugh that Dolton would have made. Instead, his grin darkened as he pushed past the big man. Outside, the air was frigid and dry. Stars sprinkled in the blackness. "Burnin' demons," Tristan cursed. "No moon. No burning moon." He thumbed the spike on his gun. The sharp pain on his never-closing wound sharpened his senses. A few seconds later, the spike glowed with blood magic. He unconsciously checked his ammo pouch and recoiled. It brimmed with shrew shot. He smirked. At least Dolton knew the essentials. Dolton. Dolton was supposed to be dead. Tristan stomped around the town, following the scent of equine down the dusty street. If he wanted to survive the night horrors, a horse would help. The lantern swung chaotically from the horse's saddle. Shadows swam from cacti and shrubs. Tristan pushed the beast brutally down the hard-packed road, its hooves pounding the dirt and dust. Stars, countless in number, glowed in his eyes. His thumb blazed with pain as he bloodied his pistol's spike. The slightest shadow shifted across the dust and dirt. His arm snapped up and pulled the trigger. The gun cracked as gore and steam burst from the muzzle. A freakish shriek screamed as the lurking shadows fled. Black scales blurred as a tail lashed out of the dark. The corpse arm cracked, tearing a hole through the monster's tail as it slammed into him. Tristan moaned as he rolled on the ground, pain racking his back and chest. The horse screamed as black claws and teeth sunk into the beast. Light fluttered around long black limbs. A sickening, slobbering crunch silenced the horse. The spike clicked and the gun roared. The monster screamed and leapt. Tristan proffered an arm to it. Teeth shattered bone and tore through flesh as the night horror slowly ripped his arm off. He grinned, pain boiling his blood, his ears deafened by the pounding of his heart. He shoved the gun into the monster's head and pulled the trigger. With a bang and twin explosions of gore, the monster spasmed, throwing Tristan off his feet. His head slammed into a stone. The world spun and darkness swarmed in. The image of a woman's brutalized corpse in his bed snapped him to focus. He didn't know where the blood in his vial had come from, but the coppery liquid cleared his mind and repaired his bones and flesh enough for him to pull himself to the dead monster. Sunlight peered over the distant horizon as he drained fresh blood into the vial. He then pushed the monster's slick serpentine head open to grasp his ragged, severed arm. The monster's blood was sure to be potent enough to reattach it. His entire arm still hurt after he forced down the blood. He flexed his fingers and sighed. Everything was back to working order. He checked his ammo pouch. His fingers came away red and wet. He sat on the dead monster, a walking night snake by the looks of it, and flicked dead shrew shot out of his ammo pouch. With the animal encased in the butt of the bullet dead, the spike of the gun had nothing to kill, and the gun wouldn't function. Sweat rolled down Tristan's face as he strolled down the stone hall of the oven-like church. He nodded sleepily as he called out, "Father! Father!" "I'm sorry, sir, but this church hosts sanctesses." Tristan jumped and whirled to look at the nun behind him. She was tall for a woman, her face smooth and round with youth. She blushed as his gaze rolled over her. Her black robes were rimmed in red instead of white. A sanctess. "My apologies, sister. I require an exorcism." "Another one?" "I'm sorry, sir, but your impure thoughts and murderous rampages are natural to your sex." She smiled, her speech playful and teasing. Tristan looked at her tiredly. "I need an exorcism." His eyes struggled with sleep. "No, not here," he muttered. "No, you bastard, I killed you, you horse-fucker," he shouted, his hands running to his head. "I didn't kill her, it wasn't me, it was him. I killed him, and now he haunts me." A laugh broke from his lips, and words whispered in the back of his mind. "Your hands stuffed her lips with cloth. Your fists broke skin and bone." A hand brushed his arm. "Shh, shh. Calm down. the Sanctess whispered. "You're going to be all right." Tristan tried to push her away, but she pulled herself closer. Blood drained from his face, and his heart slowed. She didn't know what she was doing. Marin sighed, stroking the chiseled cheekbones and grizzled scruff of the madman's square jaw. Why did they always have to be the mad ones? She knew why, but her fantasies would remain fantasy and her vows unbroken. Pushing the intruding thoughts out of her head, she refocused. She had more important things to do, like get this man to a bed in the hospital set up in the back. She stood. A tight grip strangled her ankle. She snapped her neck to look down on the stranger. Impossible! She had just put him to sleep. Dead eyes stared up at her. Glassily, the eyes rolled over her as they had done before, but this time she shivered. "Sir?" A cruel grin contorted the man's face, and his voice dripped with slime. "Oh, my apologies, sister. I was not aware I was in the presence of a Sanctess." Marin blinked and stared. Sweat soaked her. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," his voice rasped. "I appear to have misplaced my ammunition and need some replacements." "You have coin?" His smile shrank as his hands ran over his clothing. "My apologies, my dear. I appear to have misplaced my money as well. I will be back in a moment." Tristan woke as his fingers sank into a woman's flesh. Hot blood ran down his knuckles as her squirming weakened and died. His hand shook and gore fell. He pushed the woman away, her clothes torn indecently. His breath quickened and heart raced, just like Elaine. Butchered and his stomach lurched. He pulled up his pants and fumbled with his belt. His head spun. "Christina!" A bellowing cry of horror echoed down the starkly bright alleyway. Tristan's head whirled as a squat, burly man pulled a gun on Tristan. Twin thunderous eruptions of viscera from facing barrels blasted down the thin alley. Pain exploded in Tristan's shoulder, and the man collapsed on his shattered knee. Tristan threw himself out the end of the alley and stumbled towards the stables. "Murder! Murder!" shouted the man behind him, his pistol booming to emphasize his cries. Tristan held his wound as he wove between buildings and thick fences. Men poured from homes and saloons. Gunshots rang out as men took pot shots at Tristan. He bolted towards the stables as splinters rained around him. A man mounting a horse met the wrong end of Tristan's gun. He threw the empty pistol back in its holster as the brown beast shied away from the blood and noise. With his one good arm, he flung himself into the saddle and pushed the beast forward and out of the small town's closing gates. Bullets pinged off stone and buried themselves in dirt with puffs of dust. A sharp pain tore through his side, and he nearly toppled from the horse. Tristan's good hand tightened until white, and his heart pounded in his ears. A grin stretched across his face. Pain burned a hot passion in his heart. Hooves thundered behind him. Gunshots, men and beast, chased him as he laughed. Something grabbed him from the inside out, tugging on his arms and head. Panicked, he fought it. His head split with pain and his vision blurred. Sound roared and echoed in his ears. The ground seemed to disappear before him. The horse reared. Tristan fell. Marin hurried from the church at the sound of gunfire. Men burst from buildings, brandishing corpse arms, as women ran to and fro in a panic. Murder! Murder! Bellowed a man. Hindered by robes and caution, Marin moved towards the cries and into an alley. Several men beat her there, but there were some things that only she and her sisters could do. The man was short and stocky, with a fat face covered in a thick brown beard. Gore covered his leg, and still fueled a growing puddle under him. He cradled a woman's corpse in his arms. Once fair and delicate, her light blue dress was torn and stained with more than blood. Marin's stomach somersaulted as she stood watching the crying man. Then she stooped and pulled blood slowly from the corpse and wove it back into the man's knee. It would be better if he didn't notice what she was doing. The stranger's words kept echoing through her head. I didn't kill her. I didn't kill her. She should have done something. She still could do something, if she hurried. The next man she found was dead, shot 3 times, once in the shoulder and twice in the chest. She moved to the stables. I need a horse, she called at the man down 6 empty stalls. Sure thing, miss. Sister, the man said through yellow, crooked teeth. I got a couple owned by the church here. The mare had a silky black coat and moved meekly. Where do you think you're going? The voice crackled like old paper. The stranger's innocent of murder, Sister Grella. Grella snorted through her hag's nose. Sure, but you know the rules. The old woman proffered a hand to be helped up onto the horse. Marin rolled her eyes. My vows are yours, sister, flame-forged. Grella narrowed her bulbous black eyes, peering from under her white-rimmed habit. I've believed exactly one Sanctus when it came to her vows. Which was why the church liked Grella. Marin sighed and pulled the old woman up onto the saddle. Then she fingered her vial of witch blood. She could still feel stolen power pounding through her heart, but it was always good to know she had more. Dolton moved his killer's broken body with sheer force of will and a sick thirst for vengeance. More. Tristan had to suffer more. Dolton wanted, no, needed, for his killer to grow old. But only regrets and torture to fill his long, long life. He pulled Tristan's body to the river's bank, where the horse's corpse bobbed. The vial gathered as much water as blood, and the healing was only enough to allow Dolton to force the body to crawl, even that with difficulty. He sat against the side of the canyon's eastern cliff face. He checked the ammo pouch and almost laughed at the ludicrousy of it all. 4 bloody bullets. Tenderly he reached from within to without. Dolton let himself feel the pain that Tristan would have if he was awake. And Dolton wished he had died again. So he sat, half laughing in glee, half worried his sadistic euphoria would be cut short with Tristan's heartbeat. He watched a barge fat with cargo slowly row up the river. The sun was at its noon height, and despite the black hole through the center of the great ball of fire, the water glimmered blindingly. A few men pointed at the horse and Tristan. A couple of the men climbed into a skiff. Think he's dead? One asked as they approached. Must be, with a fall and those bullet holes. Just a little closer, Dolton thought. Some men live fallen from that height. Not for long, mind you, but they live. You've seen flying pigs, Sam. Tristan's hands normally moved like lightning, but with Dolton in control, they moved more like molasses. Molasses was more than the two men could have managed, as one had a bullet rammed through his chin and out the top of his head, while the other had half his neck blown off. Shouts came from the barge as Dolton tactically fell on the corpses, fumbling with the bodies, extracting shrew shot and blood. A roar tore through the canyon, and the dead horse's head exploded. Dolton literally jumped out of his skin, leaving Tristan to fall limp onto the ground. A fucking mouser! Dolton rushed back into Tristan and dragged the man away from danger. Crouched behind a boulder, he drank from the vial and reloaded. Body recovered to a workable state, he scurried like the rat he was from stone to stone for cover. The mouser deafened him as he slipped into the river. The men rowing the boat pulled their oars in. He had to hold Tristan's throat to prevent the man from inhaling water as he dove beneath the surface of the water. A stream of bubbles shot by Tristan's head before he surfaced and raised the corpse arm above the water for a clear shot. 2 more men from the boat fired on him before he shot back. Tristan's ear had a neat new piercing before Dolton fired. The first of the 2 men lost an eye. The gun panned over to the second. The second man fled across the deck. Dolton dove again as a large shifting shadow moved across the deck. The man with the mouser? Dolton swam up to the boat as it slid back down the river. Tristan's hand shot up and grasped the hole that the oars had come through. Dolton pulled up, sliding the gun arm through while detaching his head from Tristan's body. 3 men loaded pistols and wet spikes at one end of the cramped hall that made the lower deck. 3 more stood crouched and ready at the oar holes waiting for him. They died first. At the sound of gunshots, the men at the end of the hall returned fire. In the hail, Dolton retreated. 1 man pushed his head and arm out of a hole near Dolton. The bullet ripped through Tristan's arm. The only thing keeping the limb working, its own possession. Dolton vaulted back into the boat, only panicking slightly when Tristan's damned shoulders got caught on the sides of the hole he was pulling himself through. Hand clumsy from the bullet wound, he fumbled with shrew shot. The man who had shot him earlier pulled out of the hole he was leaning through. Panicked, Dolton did the only thing he could. He lunged forward and bashed the man with the butt of his pistol. The battered man dropped like a stone. Right, Dolton thought. Tristan's a lot stronger than I was. Dolton ducked down, pulling the man's body up as more shrew shot punched towards him. Dolton pulled the corpse's gun out of its hands and fired back. A sudden silence filled the space as the last of the men dropped. Dolton watched the stairs up as he filled and drank from Tristan's vial again and again, leaving it full for later. But the silence held. Where was the mouser? Dolton slid forward and crawled up the stairs. His dead eyes flickered back and forth, as if the narrow steps were a broad horizon. Step by quiet step, he drew closer to the sunlight. The small square above seemed to stretch away from him, despite the stair only taking him up a few dozen steps. Then a board underfoot creaked. Dolton almost jumped out of Tristan's skin. A shadow fell over the rectangle. An explosion left Dolton deaf. He was vaguely aware of Tristan's body falling apart as Dolton raised the man's arm to aim. Some whining shout came from the man with the mouser as he stumbled back. But the ringing in Tristan's ears made it impossible for Dolton to hear. The ghost hauled his possession up the last few stairs. Shadow melted away from the man with the mouser as he ran to jump overboard. Dolton couldn't notice the recoil and didn't hear the bang. The man fell to the ground, lifeless. The back of his big, bald head caved in. Dolton tugged on the vial twice more without thinking. Blood hacked up from Tristan's unconscious body. Dolton could taste it. He stumbled back down the stairs to fetch more blood before his vengeance was complete. A door slammed open from above. A scream pierced his healed ears. Ah, so sweet. He felt his heart flutter and his blood boil with lust. My favorite sound to hear, he sang in a quiet whisper as he swept up the stairs like a shadow. The sound of crying seemed to double in his mind, and his glee surged. 2 women crouched over the big, bald man who had the mouser. He was on them in an instant. A heavy blow to the back of the old one's head left her on the ground. The younger screamed as Dolton grabbed her hair. It was so much easier to stuff the 2 into the ship's cabin with Tristan's strength. It felt like they weren't even struggling. Tristan woke calmly at first. He was dying at the bottom of a chasm after all. Then he noticed the sway of the deck, the comfort of the bed he lay upon. A sick feeling turned his stomach as he slowly searched the room for the corpse of a woman. He didn't find a corpse. He didn't find any corpses. He found something worse. He didn't think it would have been worse, but it was. At his motions, the hunk of meat left tied up to the wall screamed hoarsely. The other, bound and huddled in the corner, began to angrily shout at him. "Just kill us already, you sick bastard," she snarled through tears. She looked more human than the other, middle-aged yet pretty. Her hair was a snarled mess of brown matted with blood. Tristan pulled his pants on. A belt loop tore in his hand. "What difference would a cold corpse make for an unburnt man like you?" she wailed. Tristan checked his pistol, pressing his thumb into the spike to wet it in blood. The woman tied to the wall was hoarse when she coughed and hacked, weeping. "Don't worry, sweetie," the older whispered. "It'll all be over soon." Tristan knelt before the older woman. In one hand he held the gun to his forehead. In the other he took the woman's tied hands, wrapping her fingers around the handle. He felt something batter at the boiling rage in his blood, at the shame and guilt that fortified him. "Kill me!" he shouted. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed as she growled at him. "Do it!" Spittle shot from his mouth as he locked eyes with her. Her hand tightened. Her hands shook. Her finger moved for the trigger. Her eyes widened, and she scrambled away, taking the gun with her. "Who are you?" she howled in horror. "Who are you? You aren't him. You can't be. You look like him, but you don't." She was weeping uncontrollably now. Tristan pulled a knife from his belt and tossed it to the floor in her reach. He grabbed the rest of his clothes and left. "What do you mean the exorcist in this church is possessed?" Marin couldn't help but shout. I thought sanctuses were supposed to know about dark arts, muttered the priest.
Witches! We know about witches!
Well then, best you know that exorcists are more vulnerable to possession, not less.
That's absurd.
Marin was about to burst like an overripe fruit falling from the top of the tree. So she kicked something. The wooden bench rattled a bit. Her foot screamed in pain. She was now angrier. Marin, he's right, Grella said calmly. Marin ground her teeth and stormed from the church. We'll have to kill him, Grella said. Maybe. Marin, where are you going? Marin kept a quick pace as she walked through the streets of the city. The stone steeple grew closer and closer. Sister Marin, Grella snarled. You can't mean to go there. That's a church of Justicars. Heretics, the old woman spat. An old, gnarled hand clasped like steel around Marin's shoulder. The younger woman's hand shot up and lightly brushed the older's. Muscle relaxed, and Marin pulled quickly ahead of the old woman. Grella wobbled on her feet. So sleepy. She tried to shake herself out of her stupor, but she was old. Her hand twitched towards the pistol up her sleeve. If the fool Sanctess entered the Church of the Justicar, well, that's what the gun was for. Marin fidgeted just outside of the heretic church. The Justicars had beaten the church proper to the New World, allowing the heretical church, weaker on the mainland, to thrive openly here. Yet, the Justicars didn't crush their opposition. Marin could be killed for a heretic for merely entering this place. But a man who had done no wrong could be saved, as long as an exorcist lived within. She took a deep breath and entered with all the devotion she could manage. She realized in a sweet sadness that this would be her life's final work. The priest was just the right kind of dashing, with a square jaw and gleaming eyes. His curly brown hair swung down to his mischievous smile. "Welcome, sister," he almost sang. "So wonderful to see new converts." "I'm not here to convert. I'm in need of an exorcist," Marin replied, trying to keep her words straight and no nonsense. It was hard with the man's blasted smile. "'Tis a shame. So many of you sanctesses flee, and I am always eager to see you." He dramatically flashed a hand in exaggerated sorrow. "You will not sway my devotion to God. An exorcist is needed. An innocent man's life hangs in the balance." The man looked aghast. "Your faith is not doubted here. We have simply evolved on God's teachings. More freedom, less suffering, and all the devotion to law and justice." "I am not here to argue about your heresy. We do not have an exorcist." Marin's heart fluttered in fear and pain. "What? I've killed myself coming in here," she squeaked. "Unless you I'm not converting." She stomped, her blood boiling. The priest sighed. "I think I have something that could help your man, but if I am to give this gift to you, you must take another." He presented an old book with his words, worn from the use of many hands. Its title read in simple, blunt script, Justicar. "You don't have to follow its teachings," he said before she responded. "Just read it and see for yourself whether you want to come back here. A blood drop is always waiting for a woman like you." "I will, if what you suggest will work." She was going to die anyway. "I have a possessed sword. If the man and the sword touch, the soul within the sword should be able to push out the other ghost." It made enough sense. It had been a short year since Marin had last worn a sword. She had, as was proper for a traditional sanctess, trained with some of the greatest swordsmen in the world, squires, for a couple of years. It felt nice to have a weapon other than her blood magic. The sword itself was an ancient style, not like the graceful rapiers of the day. She peered over her shoulder, again and again. If Grella caught her, she would die. She had to find the stranger first. The city at the end of the canyon was sprawling, built upon the grave of a native city. It was a maze of alleyways. Stone and wood flanked dusty streets. Crime was sure to be rife, but no man would bother her, not with her red-rimmed cowl. The man she was after was here, arriving yesterday. He had slipped into these alleys. She drew close. He loomed in a doorway, his eyes flooded with sorrow. The possessed man spoke in his deep voice. "Hello, sister. Here to kill me? You should. I deserve it." "No." She tugged the sword from her belt loop and offered it grip first. "Take this. It should help." He reached for it hesitantly. His eyes glazed over. "What's this, sister?" the foul soul said in its slimy voice. "What trap have you laid for me?" He slithered away with great speed. Frightened, she panicked. He had to touch the sword. Marin whipped the blade around and out of the scabbard. Her thrust caught the villain off guard. He twisted, and the blade went tip first through his gut. The sword sunk till it peeked out the other side. The gentleman mentally punched the slimy little man in the living one's body. The slimy little man tried to scurry back, but they were both in the flesh of a living man, and no man's body was big enough for more than one soul, leaving them in very close quarters. The living man's soul itself was a small thing, curled around himself and hiding from the black pit that his smallness made. "Come now," the gentleman said to the little soul, "hast thou truly lost thine will to this ruffian?" The cur had the gumption to strike the gentleman whilst his back was turned to him. The fiend fights like a groom, freshly married to his demon, the gentleman grunted. His will strained as the two souls battled to stay within the body of the living man. "Thou art a strapping young lad," called the gentleman to the living soul. "Thou hast much to live for." The little soul looked up fearfully at the two raging souls within his flesh. "By God," the gentleman thought, "this villain's will is iron." He felt a tear in the very fabric of his soul begin to open as he pushed against the fiend's will. Like a groom indeed. "Think, lad. If he is loose within thee, what will happen to our dear sister?" The little soul covered its ears. "This can't be happening," he muttered. I killed him. The gentleman reached out, searching for inspiration. He sensed the thoughts at the surface of the lad's soul. He felt himself weaken as he neared destruction. "Elaine! Remember Elaine!" The little soul hunched into a tighter ball, and the darkness around them deepened and grew. For a brief moment, the gentleman panicked. Then the space felt ever smaller as the man's soul seemed to burst into bright red flames, matching the gentleman's strength in his weakened state. The gentleman stopped fighting over the man's body and focused solely on preventing the fiend from taking it. The fire soul seemed to howl and thrash for control. The fiend struggled within it, and steadily the gentleman began to dismantle the fiend. Then the cur was gone. Tristan felt light-headed as he blinked up at the bright sky of the alley. The Sanctess sister knelt over him with a concerned expression. "Did it work?" she asked nervously. Yes, said a jolly voice in his head. Only thou and I are in here now. Dolton could hear my thoughts. Yes.
Did it work?
Asked the sister again. Tristan nodded and groaned. Why did his stomach hurt so badly? Oh, right, the sword. Stay still, the Sanctus said, as she gripped the handle and put a foot on his stomach. Wait! Tristan yelled as she yanked. The sword got halfway out, and Tristan screamed. You crazy witch, I told you to! She yanked again, the blade coming free. She threw the thing aside. Careful with that! 'Twas mine house, said the voice in Tristan's head. Blood poured from the Sanctus's hands and knit into his gut. It was strange. It was a familiar sensation, much like the vial. But the taste of the blood had always distracted from the feeling of the healing. It felt like itty-bitty worms writhed about his intestines. Tristan felt over the wound as it finished healing. He had never been this conscious of a Sanctess's witchcraft before. A gunshot rang down the alley. The woman fell to the ground, a serene smile on her lips. Tristan felt a rage erupt from his soul. At the end of the alley, framed in light, was an old hag of a nun, the steaming gun in her steady hand. He got up and lumbered toward her silently. She snarled at him. This is church's business. You best not interfere. His steps grew faster. She entered at Justicar Church. The punishment for such heresy is death, the old woman said, taking a step back, panic in her voice. Thou better not feel guilty for this, the gentleman warned. It's the law, the woman screamed as she fired on him. He didn't even feel the bullets as he broke into a sprint. And here I was, foolishly comparing Dolton to a groom. A hand snapped out and grasped her robes as she turned to run. In one motion, he pulled her towards himself and sent her flying into a wall of a nearby building with a punch. Before she could drop to the ground, he struck again and again. All he could see was red and black. Tristan snatched up the gun as it tumbled from her fingers. A righteous burning passion filled the void for the briefest of moments as he pulled the trigger. Thank you for listening to this production of To Possess Vengeance. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, subscribe and like for more content like this. I will continue to produce short stories as well as tabletop RPG stories on this channel. And don't you forget to hit that cursed little bell.